Hello, everyone, and welcome to your 2023 year ahead horoscope for Libra rising. So this video is meant for the Libra risings. Of course, you can watch this if you're a Libra sun, but it might make a little bit more sense to watch it from your ascendant. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to be first talking about just the major transits of 2023, and then I'm going to be going into advice for the Libra risings, like mindsets to have, things to keep in mind so you can have a successful year. And then after that, we're going to be going into month by month of 2023. So this is actually a two-part video. I made a video talking about all of the transits of 2023, and I went in depth in them. Make sure you watch that video so you can come back and watch this, because this is going to be more applied to how it's going to be affecting you personally. But if you want to know more about the transits, make sure you watch that video. But the major transits that we're seeing this year are, one, Saturn ingressing into Pisces. That's going to be happening in March. I've said this ad nauseum. March is the biggest month this year. There's a lot of ingresses happening that is really going to shift things. So Saturn's going into Pisces. This will honestly be a lot better for the Libra risings. Saturn is going into a much easier place for you guys, so that's pretty nice. Pluto's going into Aquarius on March 23rd. This is a 20-year-long transit. It's not going to change anything overnight personally for you. On the world stage, it will be changing a lot. But this is just something to keep in mind for the next 20 years, essentially. But that's happening in March. Jupiter is going to be ingressing into Taurus. I have mixed feelings about this for you guys. There's a lot that I like about it, but it's going to be in a difficult area for you, so we'll be talking about it. Then the North Node will be entering Aries, and the South Node will be entering Libra this July. This is shifting the eclipses over into new signs, and this is going to be affecting your first house of yourself and your seventh house of relationships. So there's a lot of relationship stuff going on here. And then we're going to be having Venus retrograde in Leo this summer. This is a awesome transit. I really like this Venus retrograde. It should be a lot of fun. Really, it's just going to be a big change in your guys' friendships, but it should be pretty good. So anyway, the biggest things I want to talk about for the Libra risings this year is change and access to other people's wealth and resources. There's going to be a lot that comes up this year around shared resources, other people's money, access to other people's stuff, getting involved in other people's business, which won't necessarily be bad, but there's going to be a big change in this area. So these are just things that you want to keep in mind. The big thing too is purging. There's going to be a lot of this year, and this is going to be true for even next year too, going into 2024. But this is going to be a big year to purge and get rid of things and people that no longer serve you. You know, if you're feeling drained, if you're feeling exhausted, that's your body's indicator that you have some stuff that's holding you back. Relationships. Shocker, the Libra risings have to deal with relationships. Breaking news. But this year has a lot to do with relationships, and less to do about you and more to do about like who you're going after or the people that you're seeing and dating. And this is a big year to get healthy. Commit to the work long term. This is a big year about health and also just about the long-term picture in terms of what you're working towards, you know, what are you doing for work and things like that. So let's go ahead and start. So actually, before I start talking about the major transits of January, what I want to talk about real quick is Jupiter. So notice Jupiter is back in Aries by the time we start 2023. Now, Jupiter had actually ingressed into Aries last spring. So from May, June, July, August, September, and even into October, Jupiter has been in your seventh house of relationships, other people. Jupiter rules your sixth house of coworkers and employees and day-to-day habits, health, pets even. It also rules your third house of siblings, neighbors, people that are close to you by proximity. And so Jupiter is going back into your seventh house, where this is going to bring up all the relationship stuff that was happening over this past summer. And so there might be a pause on that from October to November to December, but then you come back to this relationship stuff starting pretty much in January. But really the two big transits that we have going on in January are, one, Mars stationing direct. So Mars has been in Gemini for the past, 6 months at this point, from August, September, October, November, December, and now January. We had this Mars retrograde. Mars is fights and conflicts, and, Gemini is information and, talking, and it's been in your ninth house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, higher education, publishing, social media. So Mars has been going back and forth in this area. You've probably had some problems, whether that was online or whether that was, publishing something or traveling. You've probably had some delay in travel plans. Everything starts to move forward starting on January 12th. The biggest thing is Mars is like maybe you were trying to do two different things and then Mars goes retrograde and you just can't do both of them. You have to kind of choose one, or at least maybe if you have to do both of them, you have to kind of get a little bit more organized. And by the time we get to January 12th, that's when the more organized feeling of everything is coming up. This is also a bigger push forward for like energy. Like I've been saying for all of the signs, the first of this year is not going to feel as exciting. Like if you're really looking for that New Year's energy, I don't think it's going to really come until Mars stations direct. So the other thing that we've got going on is Mercury stationing direct. Mercury will enter shadow around the middle of December, and then Mercury will station retrograde just about right before New Year's Eve. So Mercury is going to be retrograde the first 3 weeks of January, and Mercury will station direct here on the 18th. This Mercury retrograde has been in your fourth house of the home, family, living situation, your roots, your parents. And so Mercury is going to be, Mercury retrogrades are often like, delays, miscommunications, paperwork going over everywhere. So this Mercury retrograde in your fourth house has been bringing up issues with your living situation, your home, your parents, maybe a miscommunication, maybe a delay in something. But then once Mercury stations direct here on the 18th, this is when, again, things will feel like they're actually starting to move forward. And Mercury in Capricorn is good for moving forward in terms of like plans, but this isn't like your fourth house. So I feel like this has much more to do with your living situation than anything. But that all gets worked out and you have a solution by the time we get to the 18th. But then after that, we get to February, and really the only thing happening in February is Mercury leaves shadow. February is like the calm before the storm before we get into March. But again, we have this Mercury retrograde, and by the time it leaves shadow here on the 7th, this is when everything clears up. It's like you might find a solution when Mercury stations direct, but then at the first part of February, things clear up and you move on. You get to go into new territory. And that's it. February is a really boring month, and it really is the lead up into March, because then we get into March and we have this Venus-Jupiter conjunction happening in Aries. This is happening on the 2nd. This is a really big deal for you guys. This is in your 7th house of relationships, others, and open enemies. That's actually really specific, and we'll be talking more about that as time goes on. But let's go ahead and go to March here. Let me kind of get this all configured again. So March 2nd, Venus is going to be conjoining Jupiter in your 7th house of relationships. And what's important about this is Venus is your ruling planet. You're a Libra rising, right? So Venus is in detriment in Aries, meaning like Venus in Libra is very about like peace and balance and fairness. Aries is about like war, right? Venus is in detriment in the 7th house, where there's the sense of being maybe like connected, maybe in a toxic way. I don't like using that word all the time, but involved in someone else, involved in some type of relationship. And Jupiter's here. There's this expansion here. So this is like kind of dating someone, an expansion in the relationship. It's a fallen Venus, so maybe you don't necessarily like the circumstances, but it's there. And it's also conjoining Chiron, where Chiron is like the wounded healer. This is something that needed to happen, and it may not necessarily feel good, but it's for the best. So this is like, I don't want to say a moving on. I don't want to say a new beginning, but there is this kind of mending of things with relationships that might have been, a little bit painful, but really needed. So that happens on March 2nd. Then after that, we have Saturn ingressing into Pisces. Come on, computer. There we go. So this is a really big deal. Saturn is going to be in your 6th house for the next 2.5 years. So the next 2.5 years, you're going to have a big focus on work, labor, routine, your health, habits, pets, coworkers, and employees. Saturn, for the past 2.5 years, has been in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, recreation, vices. So Saturn is finally leaving your 5th house. You can start to actually have a little bit of fun again. But Saturn rules your 4th house of your home and your living situation and your 5th house of creativity, and it's going into the 6th house of work. So there's something about home and creativity and home and kids or home and pleasures getting involved with your work. And Saturn is like discipline. Saturn is maturity. And in Pisces, there's this learning to like navigate and integrate things into your life. And it's going into your 6th house of health, again, day-to-day activities. And so Saturn is asking you to be more mature and more disciplined in this area. And this is going to be true for the next 2.5, 3 years, essentially. So you're going to feel a really big shift with your work, with your health, with your routines, starting on March 7th. Now, what's interesting is right after that, we have a big world shift occurring. Pluto's going to be entering Aquarius on March 22nd. I did a whole podcast about this on my show, The Delineation. It's some really deep stuff, so I won't be able to go into it in too detail right now. Also, this is a 20-year-long transit. Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for the next 20 years. So it's not just going to be what it, by the time you get to the end of it, you're going to be completely different by the beginning of it. But that's any 20-year period. But Pluto is going into your 5th house of sex, passion, creativity, arts, children, recreation. This also includes vices. This includes fun, anything that's like expressive, especially creativity. Now, Pluto rules transformation and power and fear and corruption. And I think, since we've been in 2020, 2021, 2022, Saturn's been in your 5th house, which has made you be very disciplined or shut off from these things that you would normally like to enjoy. But when Pluto goes in, this is going to call into, question your power and your fear. There might be a lot of fear that gets brought up in this area, but this is like Pluto's asking you to transmute this fear into power. It's looking for you to gain power in this situation, and it might come through a very hardcore lens, but Pluto is kind of going into this area of recreation and creativity for you, and really bringing like the serious stuff about it. Like, where does it empower you? Where does it disempower you? Where do you bend to the knee of fear versus when do you kind of stand up against things? So again, that's a 20-year long transit, but we'll be going more into that throughout the years. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can see any videos that I make about it. But then after that, Mars enters Cancer. And this is only really a highlight because Mars has just spent 8 months in Gemini in your 9th house. So that's a long Mars transit, and this ingress will be felt on a big level. Mars is entering your 10th house of career and legacy and reputation. And Mars rules fights and conflicts and separation and cutting, right? Mars is entering its sign of fall, which means Mars doesn't do that well in Cancer. Mars is about like fights and confrontation, and Cancer is about like, safety and protection. And so Mars in Cancer has to be more defensive than it is on the offense. Like Mars in Cancer is not good at like attacking things, but it's going into your 10th house of your career, reputation, legacy. And so you might have some problems coming up here. In terms of like, fights and conflicts at work, having to be more on the defensive end on work. And you're going to see, Mars in Cancer, emotional, like anger, frustration issues in your workplace. Mars also rules your 2nd house of money. So this might change your income at some point. Then we get to April, and this is when things really start to ramp up for the summer. The first thing that we have is a Jupiter cazimi in Aries. Again, this is all in your 7th house of relationships, others. And when a planet goes cazimi, this is when a planet conjoins the sun, or a sun conjoins the sun. The sun conjoins a planet. And what this means is this planet's energy or this planet's story kind of begins again. It starts fresh. This is in your 7th house of relationships, individuals, literally anybody. It could be your partner, it could be your doctor, lawyer, whoever. But Jupiter rules your 6th house of work, health, day-to-day routines, coworkers. Maybe this is starting a new relationship with a coworker, or having to work more with a specific coworker. Jupiter also rules your 3rd house, so there's going to be a lot of emphasis on close relationships to you, like aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings. And so this seems like a new big starting energy. The sun rules your 11th house of friends too, so maybe this is making a new friend, especially in the workplace. But this seems overall pretty good in terms of just starting a new big opportunity. This might be a relationship. But then about a week later, we get the first solar eclipse in Aries. Now, the nodes are still in Taurus and Scorpio at this point, but this is the first eclipse in Aries that we're going to get. And this is kind of opening the door, opening the portal into what the eclipses are going to be in store for you over the next year and a half. So again, Aries rules your 7th house of relationships, and this solar eclipse is happening in Aries. So again, a lot of emphasis on relationships at this point. Eclipses are like emergency events that kind of take away your attention, and that I don't want to say distract, but you are pulled to focus in one area of your life. And this is happening again in your 7th house of relationships. So, and also your 7th house ruler just so happens to be in the 10th house of work and career. So there's a lot of work and career stuff involved in this. But this eclipse is pretty much like opening up a portal with 7th house of relationships. It can be an extreme event. It can feel very like emergency kind of situation, even though it may not necessarily be that way. It could feel that way. But this is really like something completely starting over in relationships. And it's funny that it's right after this Jupiter cazimi. So something gets cleared up, something gets, brought up, and then all of a sudden this eclipse comes in, and it's like, okay, now all of a sudden you're dealing with this relationship stuff. Excuse me. So in the middle of eclipse season, then we get what's technically our first Mercury retrograde of the year. Mercury is going to station retrograde in Taurus. This is going to happen on April 21st. This is where this year gets weird for you. And This is in your 8th house, other people's money, death, debt, taxes, the occult, secrets. Mercury retrogrades often symbolize, a time of rethinking, a time of re-strategizing, replanning, miscommunications. And this is happening on Uranus, the planet of, unexpected events, destabilization, random outbursts of things. And so Mercury rules your 9th house of, publishing, social media, your beliefs, astrology. It also rules your 12th house of like hidden enemies, subconscious, secrets, and it's going retrograde in your 8th. So there might be some funny business going on that you may not necessarily be aware of. And this is going to be like a rethinking or a re-strategizing or looking at the area in your life that revolves death in a different way. And that's important because Mercury is going to retrograde in this first part of this first part of Taurus. And that's funny because here next month, which we'll talk about, Jupiter is going to be entering Taurus. So this Mercury retrograde is kind of getting things ready and getting all the paperwork ready for Jupiter to ingress into it. So we'll talk more about that. So we get to May and we close out eclipse season with our final lunar eclipse in Scorpio. This is happening on Cinco de Mayo. This is in your 2nd house of money, finances, possessions, resources, food even. And so the big thing here is since January of 2022, we have had the eclipses happen in your 8th and 2nd house. So there's been a big focus on money, shared resources, what's yours, what's theirs. The South Node has gone through your 2nd house, so you've probably been spending a lot more money, draining a lot more money, having to pay off bills or deal with other people's problems before your own. And the analogy I've been using for this eclipse is like, if you've ever moved a house before, there's the day where you move all the big furniture and the big boxes, and then you come back later to do all the last final cleanup. The times where we moved the big boxes were in May of 2022 and in November of 2022. There was this, gut-wrenching, having to get rid of stuff. And this is like the last final clear up of 2nd house stuff. So money, finances, resources. There's some type of expense here, some type of bill or some type of drain in cash that's coming up. But this seems a little bit expected. This doesn't seem out of the blue. This is like the least worst eclipse. Like maybe you have the money for it, but it just kind of sucks. But then we end the eclipses in Scorpio and we're done. So then we get to May 16th, about a week and a half later, Jupiter enters Taurus. So there's a lot of this I like, and there's a lot of this I don't like for you guys specifically, because it's in your 8th house of other people's money, death, debt, taxes, occult, secrets. And Jupiter rules expansion, right? It rules gifts and opportunity and abundance. And it's going into your 8th house of other people's money, other people's resources, shared resources. It also rules inheritance too. So this could be some type of death, and this could be some type of money that you get in from some type of inheritance situation. But Jupiter going into your 8th house is expanding this area, right? It's putting your mind here. So for one, you might get into more occult and weird, taboo kind of stuff. But Jupiter's, giving you all of this room for it. Like this might be, I don't want to say taking on debt, but there's an opportunity to have, a wealthy, not just a wealthy, but an over and abundance of access to shared people's resources. So, or shared resources. So this could be like making more money in some sort, maybe you took on a new job and you're, more in charge of other people's business at this point. There's something here that is expanding. Again, resources is really particular here. Like we're talking about money, any sort of tools, stuff like that. And so my only thing I don't like about it is that this is Jupiter in the 8th house. You're going to be learning and gaining wisdom about an area of your life you're not always necessarily involved in. So you're going to be thinking more about death and, secrets and changing your mind and perspective about a lot of things going on. So we'll be talking more about that as time goes on. But then after that, Mars enters Leo. This is happening in your 11th house of community, networks, friends. And so the big thing here is Mars, again, I don't usually pay attention too much to the Mars ingresses, but this year they're really important. Mars is going to be entering your 11th house. Again, friends, Mars is fights, conflicts. Mars in Leo is very courageous, bold, triumphant, kind of doing things for the glory. And as Mars enters your 11th house, it's going to be kind of kickstarting the Venus retrograde in Leo. This is going to cause all of the problems that Venus will eventually come over here and fix. Mars is also going to be going opposite Pluto. So there's going to be some type of, opposition when it comes to friends and community. And something I like to say is like your 11th house is your friends and the 5th house is the shared activities that you guys come together for, whether that's games, partying, recreation, creativity. And so there's something about friends in this area that is like really at odds with one another. Mars is also squaring Jupiter too. So there's some type of, there's some heavy conflict energy coming up here. And that's going to be important as we talk about the Venus retrograde coming up. So Mars will enter Leo and friends will be more so an issue. Then we get to June, and this is when Jupiter is going to conjoin Rahu. This is happening on June 1st. Rahu is better known as the North Node. The North Node has been in your 8th house again since 2022. So there's been this big urge, this desire, this pull to focus on shared resources, debt, other people's money, other people's business. And so as Jupiter conjoins it, the big thing here is the North Node is like this all-consuming energy that's like extreme. And Jupiter rules things like overdoing things in excess. So there's going to be this kind of like portal that opens of overdoing it with the 8th house stuff. So some people even argue that the 8th house rules sex. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think the 8th house can rule things that would be considered taboo, so that might come up in a sexual way. But Jupiter conjoining the North Node in the 8th house is like really opening up this area for you. Like there's a lot of energy coming in from this area. So expect a lot of things revolving death, other people's money, shared resources. Mercury also is leaving shadow at this point too. So it's like Mercury, it's like an occurrence happens in the 8th house that makes you rethink and replan this area. And then all of a sudden this area just explodes in your life. This seems pretty good for the most part. It's Jupiter, right? It doesn't seem bad. It's just what I worry about is overdoing it and having too much access to it. So like, if you can take a small loan out for your business, don't do the loan. Don't get a variable, interest rate or something like that. But that seems pretty decent for the most part. Then we get to the middle of June here on the 16th. This is when Saturn stations retrograde. So what I've been saying for all of the signs for this is Saturn moving direct is like you're taking more opportunity, you're given more authority, you're given more responsibility, you're given more duty. This is in your 6th house of work, health, habits. And when Saturn goes retrograde, that is that moment you realize it's like, okay, you're given all of this authority and control, and then it goes retrograde and it's like you start to question it. The analogy I like to use is like, it's like getting a management position. You might feel good about being an authority figure and having more control, but there's a moment where you realize, oh, the problems are harder. It's much more difficult to deal with more responsibility, right? And so as Saturn stations retrograde, this is going to be a time of like, you might be taking on more authority. You might be taking on more power, control when it comes to the workplace, employees, coworkers, all that kind of stuff. Same thing with health. But this is really where the growing up part begins. This is where you kind of have to step into the shoes, even if you're not ready. So this is going to be a maturation process when it comes to your health and work. So again, this is all great and dandy for, work and things like that. My only issue is it's not even really an issue. It's just, this is really where the heaviness with all that stuff really comes up. So then, by the time we get to the end of June here, just a few days later, this is when Venus enters shadow. So you might have saw on that chart that Venus at this point was already in Leo, but when she enters shadow, this is much more important. Again, this is in your 11th house, friends, community, things like that. Venus hits this degree that she will be coming back to here in just a few months. So what this means is whatever happens at this moment, you're going to be coming back to here in just a few months. Venus is all about fun, connection. She's in Leo, so there's a lot about being witnessed. And this is in your 11th house of friends and community. So and Mars is here. Mars causes fights and conflicts, right? A lot of drama. This seems like a lot of drama for you guys this year. But Venus is in evening star phase where she's like receiving all of this attention. And there might be this moment that comes up where maybe you're getting attention that you don't necessarily want, or you're being seen in a way that you necessarily don't want. And that is going to start a transitional phase of changing your value. Like Venus retrogrades are value shifts, and this is happening in your 11th house of friends. So you're going to be valuing your friends differently, right? But this is where I think you realize, oh, something's different with my friends. That's on June 19th here. Oh, whoops, did I mess this up? Let's do that. Okay, there we go. So then we get to July. This is when Mars enters Virgo. I don't like this for you guys. Mars is going into your 12th house of isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts, feelings, hidden enemies. Mars rules fights and conflicts, right? It causes issues. The problem is it's in Virgo. And Mars in Virgo is over hyper specific, too nitpicky, and it's going in your 12th house. I think you're just going to beat yourself up. Like Mars is like, paranoia. Like Mars in 12th house is like paranoia, overthinking things, being too critical about the details. And so with Mars in your 12th house, Mars also rules your 7th house of relationships. And I think some relationships might be sabotaged at this point. It's also your 2nd house ruler of money in the 12th house. So there might be some money missing or something like that. But this is also what's important about this is Mercury is going to be retrograding in Virgo. So this Mars in Virgo transit is setting up the problems that Mercury will eventually clear up. So this is when you're going to start seeing problems in like the 12th house is like mental health, stuff like that. So don't be hard on yourself is really the best piece of advice I can give you. But then after that, and this is where all of the health stuff really comes up. On July 18th, the North Node and the South Node are going to be entering Aries in Libra. This is a really big deal for you guys because the North Node is entering your 7th house of relationships, other people, open enemies. So there's going to be this big pull towards relationships, this sense that like you absolutely have to focus on relationships and other people. And it's in Aries. There's like this confrontation. There's this kind of like, initiation. There's this starting. There's this spark that's going on. But at the cost, the South Node, which represents this purge, this drain, this, releasing feeling is going through yourself, your body, your image, your personality. And so the big thing with this is if you're in a relationship and let's say you guys are happy and nothing goes wrong, this will be a time where you focus more on your partner and less on yourself. And that's a part of relationships, right? If you are single, this is where, again, you're going to have a big pull towards relationships, but the South Node going through your 1st house, like this was, in my opinion, one of the most intense transits I've ever experienced because it was like the 1st house is literally like the body and the South Node is literally like this purging and it's in Libra. So you may not feel good. You may not feel right. Libra, something is off balance here and there's going to be less attention put on you and there's going to be more things you have to get rid of. Like the South Node is get rid of things and it's in your 1st house of your body. I got rid of a bunch of like chemicals I ingested and plastics and things like that. And that might be me, but that's kind of the idea that you want to kind of start shifting your mindset towards is like, what can you purge out that is going to help you feel better? Because you're going to start feeling really drained and exhausted around this time, especially if your ascendant is in late Libra. So then we get to the Venus retrograde. A few days later on the 22nd, Venus stations retrograde. Again, this is in your 11th house, friends, community. So the big thing with this is Venus stations retrograde, and this is where that value shift occurs. Venus is your ascendant ruler, right? We're talking about your personality, who you are, and it's retrograding your 11th house of friends. This seems like you might be changing your social groups a lot more at this point. Maybe you are being seen in a light that you didn't want to be in and you want to be more honored or recognized. Or maybe you want to go after a certain group of people. You want to be more involved in a certain community that you're not involved in right now. This is where that change takes place. The problem is Venus rules your 8th house too of shared resources and it's going retrograde in your 11th house. So this might be like borrowing things or, friends borrowing things from you, you borrowing things from friends. Jupiter's in your 8th house too. So there's all this access to other people's stuff. And so maybe this is like you move in with a friend. Maybe you do more things with a specific friend because there's some resource involved. Either way, what I think is interesting is Jupiter is in Venus's sign and Venus will retrograde squaring Jupiter. So there's going to be some type of, it's not the worst thing ever, but there's going to be some type of at odds feeling when it comes to friends and shared resources and the boundaries around that, or even the access to it. So Venus will go retrograde. You're going to undergo this process and this change of changing who your friends are, changing who you hang out with. Then about literally like almost 3 weeks later, we get the halfway point of the Venus retrograde, and that's the Venus cazimi. That's on the 18th. Again, a cazimi is when the sun conjoins a planet, and this is like refreshing the planet's energy. But specifically for Venus retrograde, this is the halfway point. So what's important about this is as Venus stations retrograde, this is when you start to undergo that value change. And with anything, there's like a period where you start something, but then there's a time shortly after that where you actually start to see the results of that. This is when you start to see the results. This is when you go, oh, I actually do value my relationships differently. Oh, I actually don't want to be seen this way. Oh, it's like maybe you don't like being the center of attention and then, you get a little bit of attention and then you're like, oh, I actually really like this. I actually really like being respected in this way instead. That's when this occurs, when you go, oh, this is what I actually value differently. Oh, this is actually what's going on. So this is a probably good time to, again, change friends, get rid of friends, and really start to see and experience that value shift. Then about a week and a half later, Mercury stations retrograde in Virgo. So again, Mars is in Virgo at this point, causing all of these issues in the back of your mind, your subconscious, your fears. Mercury is there at this point, so you're really in the back of your head. Like you can be really the Virgo stuff is a little bit difficult for you guys. But as Mercury goes retrograde, this is going to be the time to relook at your subconscious, your fears, the narrative you tell yourself. Because as Mercury goes backwards through here, this is going to be a rethink, a re-strategize, a replanning, a going backwards in your 12th house. So maybe there are some shitty narratives you tell yourself, and you can be really stuck in your ways. This is a good time to really purge out and clean out those subconscious beliefs, those things that really, like, the 12th house rules self-sabotage too. So if you get into periods of doing that, this is going to be a time to really look in the back of your head and really go what do I believe about myself? What am I subconsciously doing that's getting in my own way that I might not be realizing? That's going to be around this time. And that brings us into, well, actually not yet. 4 days later, Mars enters Libra. So again, this Mars ingress is important because this is going to be kickstarting all of the Libra stuff that we have going on for the rest of the year. There's a lot of Libra stuff going on. Mars, again, fights, conflicts, and Libra is balance and peace. Mars doesn't do well in Libra. Mars, wants to fight, and Libra is about not doing that. So when Mars goes into your first house, you're probably going to feel more frustrated and argumentative than normal, but also Mars in Libra is very passive aggressive. It's very indecisive. It's willing to do things for other people. But this is also when your 7th ruler of relationships is in your first house. So this brings up all of the relationship stuff up again. And there's going to feel like this weird balance, feeling like you have to do things for other people, maybe not necessarily for yourself, but you're a Libra rising. That's nothing new. And we're going to be talking more about that because that gets important as we go along. So then as we get into September, this is when Venus stations direct in Leo. By the time we get to September 4th, this is now Morning Star Venus. Morning Star Venus goes after what she wants. Evening Star Venus is getting things. Morning Star Venus is very ambitious about what she wants and what she wants to get. And this is Venus in Leo, attention, glory, being recognized. This is your 11th house of friends and networks and community. So there's this big forward movement and this new start with friendships around this time. It's you've gone through this value shift with friends. Now you're doing something else. Then what's more interesting, though, is on the same day, Jupiter stations retrograde. And again, in your 8th houses, other people's business, other people's belongings. And what's interesting is Venus is going to be squaring Jupiter this time. So there's maybe you're getting seen by friends, but maybe in a weird way that you don't want to be. And Jupiter going retrograde is Jupiter's going to be giving you all of this opportunity and abundance and good stuff from other people's resources. But then when Jupiter goes retrograde, you might start to question that. Those resources might go away and you might lose a little bit of faith and hope. And the time for a Jupiter retrograde is the time to be grateful, keep that gratitude, remain faithful, even when, the faith goes away. Especially related to, again, other people's resources, other people's money. And so it's Venus stations direct, you're doing all this new things with friends, but maybe you're rethinking about how involved you get into it. Or is it because they have access to other people's stuff? Or maybe because you have access to other people's stuff, you're friends with these people. This is just going to be a time of really changing your beliefs around shared resources and being involved with other people's stuff. Then, right after that, Mercury is going to be stationing direct in Virgo on the 16th. That's a little bit more into the middle of September. But again, this is in your 12th house, repressed parts of yourself, isolation, alienation. And as Mercury stations direct, this is where you kind of see your hidden enemies a little bit better. The 12th house rules hidden enemies. And Mars is in your 7th house of open enemies, is in your 1st house of yourself. So I feel like you might be realizing, who is a friend and who is a foe? Venus is also squaring Jupiter at this point. So there's this kind of balancing act that you have to do with relationships. And I think you might realize, again, maybe where it's best to have boundaries with people. But Mercury stationing direct in your 12th house is at least getting your subconscious beliefs and your fears cleaned up a little bit and being more clear about what's getting in your own way and how you get in your own way. That could also bring up a lot of health stuff too. Then we get to October, and this is where Mars conjoins the South Node. This is a really big deal for you guys because, again, Mars is in your 1st house of the self, the body, and this is bringing up all the relationship stuff. And this, to me, looks like, it's this new relationship starts, but then by this point, it's over. Your seventh house ruler is in detriment in the first, and it's conjoining the south node. There's something that has to be drained out. There's something that has to be that has to be gotten rid of here. Mars also rules your second house of money, so maybe you have to have a big expense on yourself that maybe you didn't want to spend the money on, or maybe someone spends money on you that you didn't really like. That's something that happens. But as Mars conjoins the south node, this just seems like a kind of like, this relationship's exhausting. I'm exhausted. I don't know what to do. Mars in Libra is like, it's just nothing is in balance here. And that might throw you guys off given you're a Libra rising. So then that is going to tee us up for the eclipses that we have coming up, which we'll talk about. But after that, about a week later, Mars enters Scorpio, and it's going into your second house of money, finances, possessions, food even. What I like about this is now that the south node is not there, you don't necessarily have to worry about like spending too much money or draining money. Mars does burn through cash when it's in the second house. So this might be a time of spending more money, but I also think it's going to be a time of utilizing your money. Like Mars is in its home sign. This is like, taking your money, making a lot of it, and doing a lot of things with it. And this seems like a big recharge to your finances after a long time of like paying off debt and, having money go away. This seems like a bigger recharge when it comes to money, like money starting to come in more at this point, or you're getting more organized on your expenses. We'll be continuing that in just a second. But then 2 days later, we have our first solar eclipse in Libra. Again, this is in the first house, self, body. I think you get it by this point. And the big thing with this is our first eclipse in Libra. We haven't gotten one yet. And this is in your first house of yourself, your image, what you look like. And so this could bring up health issues. I think you might be experiencing some health issues this year. And it's really just like the astrology says, just get rid of stuff. Go like eliminate things. And this eclipse is in Libra in your first house. This is really resetting your identity, especially surrounding relationships. And at this point, Venus, who just went retrograde in Leo, is now fallen in the 12th house in opposite Saturn. So I think this is also going to bring up health issues. If you've been unhealthy over the summer, this is really where it's going to be really coming up. But I also think you might feel kind of insecure about yourself, to be honest with you guys. I think you're going to be feeling a little bit hard, and there might be this rejection kind of feeling. So it just seems like a lot of the relationship dynamic really shifts around October. So then we get to November, and this is when Saturn stations direct. It's the first transit that we have here on the 4th. Again, this is in your 6th house, so work, labor, routine, health, habits, pets, coworkers. This is where, again, Saturn moving forward is like you're taking on all of this new, responsibility, obligation. Saturn goes retrograde where it's like, oh, I have to grow up. Oh, I have to learn this now. Saturn stations direct where it's like you grow into the shoes that you're wearing and you finally start to mature and you go like, no, I know how to discipline myself. I know how to address this situation. I know how to take the authority. And this just feels like while you might be like challenged by the responsibilities you've taken on, this is where it becomes easier to handle those responsibilities. And you kind of just have a growing up process. So that sounds good, in my opinion, at least. And this is also in your 6th house of health. So like really taking your health more seriously around that time. But then right after that, about a week and a half later, maybe 2 weeks later, there's a Mars Cazimi in Scorpio. Again, this is in your 2nd house. But as we just said, a Cazimi is like when a planet resets itself and, that energy starts again. Before I talk about that, because again, that's on the 17th and we're still looking at the 4th here, Mars is going to be making an opposition to Jupiter and Uranus before this happens. So this seems like you're making money, but you're also going to be having random expenses or money kind of going back and forth. There's going to be kind of this ping pong effect of like, oh, I've got all this money, but then something happens and then another thing happens. And so once you clear all of that up, that's when we get to the 17th and we have that Mars Cazimi. Mars rules your 2nd house of money and finances and resources. So it's resetting all of that money stuff for you. I think you finally get to a ground zero here. And this is a good ground zero because it's like Mars in its chariot. Like it's very strong. Mars also rules your 7th house of relationships. So this can be really resetting relationships for you. Like maybe all that eclipse stuff was really gnarly. And then by this point, it all kind of changes. The Mars cycle in astrology has always been analogized with the hero's journey. And so this would be like when the hero's journey starts again. But I've been kind of coining this as like the villain origin story. So this might be like a time of like using like pain and resentment as like fuel, like as motivators to get things done. Then that brings us to Mars in Sagittarius. This is actually not a big deal for you guys. Out of all the signs, this is probably the least big deal. But Mars will be entering your third house of communication, technology, short distance travel. It's Mars in Sagittarius. It's like, let's go. You're probably going to be doing a lot of traveling, at least local traveling, a lot of moving around. The only issue is Mars, when it enters, is going to be squaring Saturn in your sixth. So there's something about your time and your schedule that's getting in the way of your work and your discipline. I think it's going to be really easy to be distracted at this time. So if you're really committed to your work and your routines, this is going to be a time where, you know, what you want to do and what you have to do are going to be in conflict with each other. That brings us to, December. There we go. And we pretty much wrap up the year. We have another Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. Again, this is in your fourth house, home, family, living situation. But what's important about this one is Mercury stations retrograde at the same degree that it stationed direct at earlier in the year. So what you have to pay attention to is whatever was going on in January and February of 2023, you're going to come back to here in December of 2023. So again, you know, Mercury rules your 12th house of isolation and private spaces, also your 9th house of beliefs, and it's going retrograde in your 4th house. So again, some type of living situation problem, some type of hidden enemy in the living situation, some type of miscommunication with your parents or with, you know, a family member or things like that. Some type of delay or a rethinking time when it comes to the home and the family. And that brings us to the last transit that we have this year, and that's going to be on December 30th, right before the new year. Jupiter stations direct in your 8th house where it's been. And the biggest thing with this is as Jupiter is retrograde, this is like a questioning of your faith, questioning of your beliefs. But by the time Jupiter stations direct here on the 30th, I think this is a really great motivating factor to go into the new year with. Because Jupiter stationing direct is like hope is restored, faith is restored, and that abundance and that and those opportunities start to be coming back in. Like Jupiter retrograding in your 8th house is like really questioning your beliefs around shared resources and other people's money and death. And, you know, there's this period of reflection and kind of going within. And then Jupiter stations direct, and it's like you kind of get clear on what your beliefs are. You get clear on what, you know, you value. Jupiter in Taurus is a lot about what do we value? And this is in your 8th house of death. So really asking kind of some of the bigger questions. And so I think by the time we get to the New Year's Eve, there's this kind of like, you know, opportunity or abundance factor that comes into your life through someone else that might enable you to do other things that you really want to do. But that's this year. That's 2023. So let me know in the comments below, what month are you looking forward to the most? What month are you not looking forward to? Does any of this line up with your plans or what your expectations are for 2023? I really want to know in the comments. Make sure you subscribe because I'm going to be posting videos about Jupiter in Aries, Jupiter in Taurus, Saturn in Pisces, and you don't want to miss those. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next time.